What it do? Welcome to another new episode of Locked On Bucks. On today's show, the shorthanded Milwaukee Bucks lose 114-106 to the Phoenix Suns, and with that L, the Bucks finish up their 5-game road trip 1-4. Should there be reason for concern? We'll answer that question, plus break down the game and discuss more about Khris Middleton's injury on today's episode of Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Camille Davis. You can catch me weekly on the Technical File podcast, as well as find my work over at Cheesehead TV and Pack a Day Podcast. Joining me is Justin Garcia of the Bucks Radio Network. We appreciate you for tuning in, and thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Now, Justin, the Bucks lose 114-106 to the Suns. There was no Brook Lopez. He missed the last 3 games for the Bucks out with personal reasons. There was no Dame in this Suns loss. He tweaked his ankle against Utah. Doc did mention the fact that if it was a playoff game, Dame probably could have gone last night. But given the fact that it's only game 50 over an 82-game stretch, not worth really pushing it at this part. And then we lost Khris Middleton halfway through the first quarter, went up for a 3. KD's foot got underneath him, flagrant 1. Khris was out. He tried to play through it for a bit, but after that, he came out the game and did not return. And with those 3 out, the Bucks were missing 3 of their top 4 scores. Overall, I thought it was a good defensive effort from the Bucks, just not enough offense.
It was a very good defensive effort to hold the Suns to 48 points in the first half. And I mentioned it too, that the Suns had I think it was like a 70.2 offensive rating in the half court in the first half. So the Bucks defense was doing their job. And I know some people push back of, well, part of that is the Suns offense, that they were maybe not the greatest shot selection. And both these teams were missing some pretty good looks, which is true. But I think the bigger thing is, as we were discussing before we started taping, Camille, is this defensive unit just looks, I guess, for lack of a better word, better. Like they're more engaged, and we've seen more crisp movements. They seem to be more on a string, that they have an idea of what they want to do. And I don't think that's coincidental, because from day one of the big things we heard from Doc Rivers, we heard a lot, but one of the big things was identity. That, I asked this team, what is your identity? And nobody could really give me an answer. And I don't know if we have it yet, but we're starting to move closer to it, especially defensively. That it's almost funny that in many ways, when you look at the numbers, and I know this isn't all Doc Rivers, but a lot of the things that we heard from Adrian Griffin that this defense wanted to do, we're seeing it now after the change. They're forcing more turnovers. They've been a more high pressure system where they're trapping and blitzing more. And that's leading to fast break offense opportunities for them. They've defended the fast break much better and been better in transition. They're rebounding better as well. So all of these things that we were kind of looking forward to as the season started, we're starting to see them now. And I think that's quickly becoming part of this defensive identity now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned the fact that with this Bucks team, we have been seeing signs of improvement. And you mentioned how in the first half or in this game here, how that Bucks defense was able to clamp up a little bit on the Phoenix Suns. Now, the Suns were 1 of 9 from 3 going into halftime, which is something that you're not used to seeing. But there was a lot of ISO ball from the Phoenix Suns offense in that first half. And it was very clear. I believe they had 3 assists at the end of the first half. So it was really fun to watch just the one-on-one matchups as a Bucks fan. As a Phoenix Suns fan, you're probably a little bit more frustrated with how the ball wasn't moving too much. The Suns ended up finishing with 17 assists after having only 3 in the first half. And you saw in the second half with that Phoenix Suns offense that they pushed the pace a bit more. They moved the ball around, and the Bucks defense did keep them connected through the third quarter. It was in that fourth quarter where things just got out of hand, and the Bucks just did not have enough offense at that point. And Doc Rivers mentioned that himself, and he said after the game, you knew at some point you just felt like we wouldn't have enough offense on the floor. And that's probably what happened. And again, there was no Dame, no Brooke, no Khris. Khris started the game off pretty hot. He was 2 or 3 from the field, looking pretty good. And then he went out. And at that point, it was really Giannis and Malik Beasley holding down the load for the Milwaukee Bucks, which doesn't feel like a real sustainable way to create offense successfully.
Well, Campaign too. Don't shortchange him.
That is very true. Campaign, we got to give Campaign some love here, because not only did he make some key baskets here for the Bucks, but he was out here hustling on defense as well.
Yeah.
Like, you're talking about an identity for this team forming. Campaign forcing an 8-second call on Devin Booker in the backcourt. Like, didn't have that on my bingo card at all.
Well, and that's one of the other things too with this identity is Doc Rivers has brought up Campaign a couple of times before, and that part of his game specifically, that they're utilizing him kind of how we saw the Bucks use Javon Carter last year, that they want him to be picking up guys the full length of the floor and basically just being that pesky defender that makes life frustrating for players bringing the ball up the floor. That it seems pretty clear that's what they envision the role is for Campaign. So that's part of the identity too. And that's, as you mentioned, that 8-second call, that was in that stretch where the defense was playing at their best. And I mentioned that defensive rating or offensive rating for the Suns, but the league average is around 100, I think, in the half court. And look, I don't care if it was shot selection. It's still the Phoenix Suns with Bradley Beal and Devin Booker and Kevin Durant against a shorthanded Bucks team where you're basically going at it with Malik Beasley and Campaign. We need you guys to really lock down defensively here. I don't care if it was poor shot selection. You still more than did your job. And that to me was one of the more impressive parts of this, was how this team looked in the first half, because I'm sure there was frustration from Suns fans. And it felt like a lot of games we've seen this season when you think about both games against the Blazers and some other games the Bucks have had against shorthanded teams. So you can see how that'll happen from time to time. And maybe it's easier to cope with that as a Bucks fan when you see the Suns do it. But it was very promising to see that. And I know we'll get to the record. 1-4 is obviously not great. And I think the only real blemish you would point to, I don't even think it's the fourth quarter against Utah, because we've gone into that quite a bit. There are reasons to back that up. I'm sure it's not ideal to lose a game where you led by 12 going into the fourth, but I think you can kind of understand why. The only real blemish where you leave disappointed was that Blazers game. Other than that, even though there were more losses, a lot more than wins, I still feel pretty good about what we saw in these 5 games.
I do too. And we're definitely going to dive deeper into that. But you mentioned the defense and the effort, and I have to shout out Giannis as well, because we mentioned who was not playing in this game with him to help carry the offensive load. And Giannis saw Kevin Durant as a defensive matchup where he had to check KD for long stretches of the game. And I love seeing the superstar matchups. Like, that's something that with Bud, you didn't see as much, where you're just trying to be strategic because you don't want to wear guys out on defense when they have to also score on offense. But in this game, partly because there just weren't many other options. Like, I would imagine if Khris did not get injured throughout the game, you would have saw him on KD a lot more frequently as well. But it was Giannis, really one of the only guys in the league that has enough length to stay with KD. And it was just really fun watching that matchup. I thought Giannis played really great defense on Kevin Durant. I know KD got that dunk in the fourth quarter that everybody was going crazy over, where Giannis wasn't really like in front of him. It was more like help side defense trying to come in and make a play. Kevin Durant got the best of him there. But I was really impressed with the effort that Giannis had defensively, especially while having to carry the load offensively. And he started the game off offensively slow. 0 for 5 from the field, started to kick it up, went 5 of 6 right after that stretch, and finished the game over 50% from the field. Just wanted to give Giannis some credit, because it was fun watching him duel with Kevin Durant in this one.
Yeah, closed the game, I think 13-19 after that 0 for 5 start. And that was a big part of it too, as Doc had said after the game, when we lost Khris, 6 or 7 minutes into this game, we knew it was going to be a pretty big challenge for us defensively, not even factoring in the offense and where's the supplemental scoring going to come from. But had said, we knew it was pretty much Giannis and Jay were all we had to throw out there on the perimeter against Kevin Durant, and specifically noting that matchup of KD versus Giannis, and Doc saying, I went to it early because we didn't want KD to get going and to get a size advantage. And even mentioned there's two guys in the league that Doc thinks can stay with KD laterally and can still contest his shots. Giannis and Victor Wembanyama. No pressure, Wemby. But
Right.
that was the big part of it was, we didn't want him to get going early, and I knew the intensity that Giannis would bring, and we just kind of leaned into it. And I saw somebody else point this out too, and it is worth mulling over and debating of, the way that this team did play this season, because we don't want to just pile on Mike Budenholzer and Adrian Griffin and man, things are so much better now. Right. But the way that they played earlier, when you saw guys playing further out on the perimeter and having to do some things outside of their comfort zone, I do wonder, and I forget who it was that brought this up, so my apologies if they're listening, but I do wonder if that's benefited Giannis when you look at the way he has taken on some of these challenges. I mean, we've all known about Giannis's ability as a help defender, but I think at times we could overinflate his ability on the perimeter. And look, he shouldn't be a lockdown guy when he's a 7-footer going against some of those guards and smaller forwards. It should be a bit of a challenge. But I do really feel like he has gotten better at that part of his defense so far this season. And you can't help but wonder how much of it is having to do that more frequently with the way that Adrian Griffin had them playing defense.
Definitely something to consider with that, because when you think of Giannis as an on-ball defender, like, we don't normally see him matched up on a primary offensive weapon, in part because he is a 7-footer. But the other part of it is, like I mentioned before, is like you're trying to also keep him fresh for defense or for offense. And on top of that, he's one of the best help defenders in the league. So you want to, of course, lean in on what his strengths are. So it's something to keep an eye on with Giannis, because I think back to the championship season and that series against Miami Heat, where he was the primary defender on Jimmy Butler, and you saw how he was able to affect Jimmy in that series. And then last year against the Heat, he was kind of frustrated that he didn't get the call to be the defender against Jimmy Butler a little bit more frequently. And even though he was hurt, he had the back injury. I don't know if Giannis, with that injury at that time, would have been able to slow down Jimmy, Michael Jordan, Butler that we were seeing in the playoffs last year. But it is encouraging to see him this year gearing up for that. He mentioned in the offseason that he was coming for it. He wanted the challenge, and he's getting it. It's being called for him to do it, and he's stepping up to it. Now, still not great navigating screens, but again, he's a 7-footer. You don't expect that from him. So I really love the effort that he put in last night against Kevin Durant. And I'm looking forward to seeing how Doc continues to use him going forward. But I do want to also talk about the latest injury news around Khris Middleton. The Bucks have had pretty good injury luck throughout the season so far. Khris Middleton's ankle, that was one I did not want to see with all of the injuries that he has been battling back from over the last few seasons. So we'll talk about the latest around Khris Middleton up next. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you'll be burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. And honestly, I'm a PrizePicks player, and I know exactly why that is. So I'm going to tell y'all why it is the number one platform. It's the easiest and it's the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, because it's just you against the numbers. You don't have to worry about playing against thousands and thousands of other players, which normally within there, you're going to have some pros and some sharks. So with PrizePicks, all you're doing is picking more than or less than on 2 to 6 different player stat projections. And then you can watch all those winnings roll in. And watching the winnings roll in, when I pick right, is exactly my favorite part of Prize Picks, because when I get my money, when I win money, whether that's, with a friendly bet with somebody or through Prize Picks, I want my money quickly as possible. And that's why I love Prize Picks, because they have super quick withdrawals. Quick withdrawals plus easy gameplay plus an enormous selection of players and stat types. All that adds up to make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So head over to prizepicks.com/lockedonnba and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnba and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. We appreciate you for tuning in here to Locked On Bucks, and the NBA trade deadline is fast approaching. Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to be your place for live reaction Thursday starting at 12 p.m. Central Time. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube today so you don't miss Josh Lloyd breaking down every NBA trade with analysis and insight you can only get from Locked On Fantasy Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I would be remiss not to mention the fact that here on Locked On Bucks, we will also be having our Thursday show live covering the trade deadline. We're expecting the Bucks to make some moves, so me and Justin will be reacting to the moves the Bucks make, if they make them, as well as other moves in the NBA that affect the Eastern Conference standings and just the hierarchy in the NBA here. So make sure you guys also tune in to Locked On Bucks on Thursday, which I'll use this time to remind you on YouTube, since we will be live, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube page, hit the notification bell so you know when we go live, and you can join, be part of the show as we go live. Now, Khris Middleton injured his ankle early in the first quarter, like we mentioned, tried to play through it, looked the step slow, it just didn't look right, came out the game, did not return. After the game, Doc Rivers did mention the fact that the x-rays were negative, so yay for that. But it was also reported, by Eric Name at The Athletic that Middleton did leave the game with a walking boot and crutches. Now, the Bucks have been relatively healthy this season, but now with Khris, I guess you could also say Dame's ankle, although he might have been able to play last night if it was a playoff game. It seems to me, Justin, like the All-Star break can't get here quickly enough so these guys can actually get some rest.
Yeah, they had been very fortunate with injuries this season when we've talked about it. I suppose we should find some wood to knock on. That we've talked about Giannis's durability this season. Even Dame, only 4 games that he's missed. Part of it is what we've seen across the league with what is impacting now Joel Embiid. I don't want to laugh at his injury, but the way that the Pacers have handled the Tyrese Halliburton situation as well, where he's playing 15 minutes a game recently, that they're just playing him so he can still be eligible for those awards.
Yeah.
So part of it is that, but the Bucks have been very durable and have been fortunate with injuries, even with their role players. When you think about guys that haven't really missed time this season, and now it seems to have all crept up in a span of a couple of days, with Dame tweaking that ankle issue and Brook Lopez not in injuries, as Doc Rivers did confirm it was for the birth of his child. So congratulations to he and
Big
his
congrats.
wife. But now the Khris Middleton thing, and even Camille, I'm sure you felt the same way, but when we saw Giannis get that dunk or that layup and he came up grabbing his back, you just immediately thought, all right, just do what the Celtics did, just hit eject, play all the bench, and just play for this homestand. But of course, because he's Giannis, he's back up after the timeout and back there on the floor. So they've been very fortunate with their injuries, and it's very rare to have that carry throughout a season. None of us know the extent of what this is going to be for Khris Middleton. I think it would be safe to approach things and say, good chance we don't see Khris play before the All-Star break if you're leaving on crutches and a walking boot.
Right.
I'm not going to rush to conclusions that, oh no, that's a 5 to 6 week injury or something along those lines. But that part is timing up nicely here, where you got 2 more back-to-backs before the All-Star break with 5 games left, which again is crazy, this stretch that they're in. But then you do get that week off, and you have a challenging schedule in the second half, but it does lighten up a little bit with some more rest days, and use that to your advantage. As we had mentioned, some of the areas that are looking better defensively, has it come at the expense of the offense? Sure, but this is also what Bucks fans were clamoring for most of this
Yeah.
season. And look, as Doc Rivers said, you mentioned the comments about Pat Connaughton, which I found to be very, very interesting. We both did. He basically, and this is 2 games in a row, I think we've heard this, kind of wondered, should I play Andre Jackson a little bit more? That was seemingly the next man up in the rotation, and ultimately didn't, as Doc said, because I'm trying to get Pat's confidence back. I don't know if he's lost it per se, but I'm just trying to get him back to where he was and help build those minutes up. And I think that kind of ties into this week, right? That
Mhm.
Pat hasn't had the best shooting season. And it really kind of started with that injury last year, that it was kind of a struggle to get back to that form. But Doc has talked about this week. He was asked about it before the game too, but he has talked about this even before he took this job as the coach of the Bucks, about what trade deadline week is like. And as Doc had said when he was a member of the media, he hates it because it's a lot for the coach. We oftentimes think about John Horst in the front office and what that means of, man, they're working the phones and what deals can they be sniffing out here and trying to find. But as Doc has said, I'm the one that takes the bullets with this, that I'm the one that has to go out there and be the front facing manager for the team, essentially, because you have guys that, as much as they can say they tune all of it out, I'm sure you do to an extent, but you can't tune all of it out. You
Right.
can't escape everything, especially in the day and age of social media. That Pat Connaughton has heard chatter and has heard Bucks fans saying, man, wouldn't it be great if we could move Pat for this? Bobby Portis has heard the same. Young guys have heard the same. And that's Doc Rivers' job, to make sure, hey, guys, don't worry about that. Here's how we're going to use you. You're still part of a team. And has talked about the challenges he's had in the past with a couple of players that knew, look, my name has been brought up. I've heard it, and trying to get them reconnected and back on the same page. And as he's said, some blunt conversations he's had with players in the past of, look, we're not trading you because there's just not that interest around the league, versus, look, we're not trading you because we think you're a big part. But either way, that's on Doc. And I think this is part of that too, of, look, you can't worry about what you're hearing. You're a part of this team as of right now. I want you to be a part of this team, and I need you to get back to this level. So in the short term, I'm going to try to get you there. And I think guys like Pat, like Bobby, to a lesser extent, I know we haven't seen him as much, but even guys like Andre Jackson Jr., that's the big challenge for Doc Rivers, I would say, this week, but it basically ends today. And now tomorrow is the best day of the year for these guys, where okay, I'm still here.
Yeah, you finally get some clarity. Like, there's no more rumors. There's no more wondering about what can happen, what might not happen. Come 2 p.m., well, let's say like 2:05, 2:10, in case some trades come in late Central Time, you will know what team you are going to be on for the remainder of the season. And that does bring some levity, I think, to the situation. I love that you brought up how Doc mentioned his reaction to it. Excuse me. Because I thought it was really interesting when he mentioned the fact, like, as a coach, it's on me to kind of keep a gauge and an eye on how guys are feeling. Like, guys might tell you, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. He says the same thing as if you're in a huddle and you ask a guy, hey, which way do you want to run this play? And Doc said that guys will say, I can, either way it goes. And he's like, you can only go left, or you can only go right. But here you're saying whichever way is fine with you. But I know the truth of what your skill set allows. And it's the same thing with the trade deadline, where it's like, you can keep saying you're good, but I have to make sure that those words are actually true, because that could just be a projection of you saying everything's going to be all right, not worrying about it, not thinking about it. But it can affect your game somehow, some way, some shape, some form. And with Pat Connaughton, it's been an interesting season for Pat, right? He's shooting 38% from three, second highest of his Bucks career so far from three. But it just has felt inconsistent for him throughout this season. And when I saw that going into the Phoenix game, there was going to be no Dame, there was no Brooke, I assumed that campaign was going to be starting at point guard. So when I heard the news that was going to be point guard PC, I said, that's an interesting decision. And Pat Connaughton himself mentioned the fact that he hasn't really run point guard since high school. So I was curious, and I had to look up, when did Pat Connaughton graduate high school? And I was like, 2011. So it's been some years since Pat Connaughton has been tasked with being the point guard. And I say that somewhat facetiously because, of course, when you have Giannis on the court, when you have Khris on the court, those are two guys who are also going to initiate the offense there. So it's not going to be all on Pat. But once Khris went out, then the equation changed a little bit, where it was Giannis bringing the ball up. We did see more campaign minutes, but the point about Doc around trying to build up Pat's confidence, the timing of that is really interesting. Heard on the broadcast yesterday as well that Pat and Doc went on a golfing outing as well recently while they were in Phoenix. So it does seem like Doc is really pouring in time and effort into Pat Connaughton. And it's just so interesting given the fact that Pat Connaughton's name is probably the name that you're hearing the most in trade rumors for the Milwaukee Bucks of how they can upgrade this roster.
Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis maybe more, just because of I think the value that Bobby brings. Not to say that Pat is not a valuable player, but there's more with Bobby's offensive production. But those are two big names that you're going to continue to hear. And the other interesting thing that struck me, and I should say continue to hear for all of 24 hours basically. Yeah. But when Doc was talking about what it's like this week for him and how much he hates it as a coach, trade deadline week, he did talk about the front office. And, we've heard him talk about his relationship with John Horst a couple of times already. But again, use the word, and it's funny, the more you listen to Doc Rivers, number one, the candor that you get there. And I think the transparency and the honesty, like things like Pat Connaughton, I wanted to work on his confidence. And Andre Jackson Jr. would have been next man up, or maybe I should have played some more of these guys, but here's what I'm thinking, that it's been a breath of fresh air compared to some of the messaging that this team has gotten for the last 5+ years and how buttoned up it's been in the past. But he's talked about his relationship with the front office. And I think when you listen to Doc Rivers at times, you can pick up on some subtle shots and sometimes not so subtle shots that he's taken at some previous stops. And I do wonder if this was directed at his former boss in Philadelphia. But when he talked about his relationship with John Horst and said, it's been nice working with him, it has been refreshing and a breath of fresh air, that relationship that we have, and that, this office, this front office, the organization, they give you a lot of information to dissect. And I hate the deadline because you're always nervous as a player. And he joked he wasn't so much as a player, but as a coach, you're nervous for these guys too, because what we just went through of, I don't know if I'd say messes, but what you're going to have to deal with, and putting everybody's mind at ease and just trying to forge ahead here. But mentioning of, they give you a lot of information to dissect. If I'm going to read between the lines, I take that as, the front office is pretty candid with me of FYI, here's some of the things that we're discussing. Maybe not down to the detail, but it could involve player X, Y, or Z. So just start to think about how you would, shape some rotations or things you would do among that nature. And part of that too is the trust in Doc Rivers to say, we're going to tell you this, and we know it's not going to be given to the players of, hey man, did you know they're talking about trading you? But that is a pretty big burden for Doc Rivers to kind of hold that and figure out, how do I continue to maximize these guys? How do I build on that confidence, and how do I have them on the same page? So it's been everything I think we've all imagined and hoped for, listening to Doc Rivers speak before and after games.
Absolutely. And the Doc Rivers era has gotten off to a 1-4 start. As we've mentioned, the Bucks are 3-5 since the coaching switch. And now the Bucks are tied for third in the East with the Knicks after having a firm hold on that 2 seed for a good stretch of this season. My question to Justin, because at this point, me and Justin have been doing Locked On together for a while. Trust you, Justin. I need you to check me if I need to be checked. And I want to know, should there be some concern around these Bucks? We're going to discuss that up next. Sometimes I have a bad habit of waiting until the last minute to make decisions. I can procrastinate. I will be completely honest with y'all about that. I can procrastinate. So there might be an event or a game that I'm interested in, but I don't pull the trigger on a purchase until the very last moment. And that's part of the reason why I'm thankful for Game Time. because with killer last minute deals, all in prices and views from your seat, plus their best price guarantee, Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. It's a fast and easy way to get tickets for all sports, music, comedy, theater events, whatever is going on near you. And one of my favorite Game Time features is the ability to see views from the seat in the venue before you purchase your tickets. Because sometimes you're out of town, you're not exactly sure, but you know you want to see your favorite artist. So it's always super clutch to be able to see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Game Time is truly the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. And again, you can get those ticket deals up to the last minute, which for someone like me, I'm thankful for. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKED ON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKED ON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, Justin, it's time for some real talk here. So check me if I'm crazy, but as we've mentioned, the Bucks have finished their West Coast trip 1-4, and with this loss against the Phoenix Suns, wraps that all up. Am I crazy for not feeling panicked about this team going forward? Like, I understand the record has not been great, but to me, the process has looked better and something that seems to be more sustainable to get the results that you want than what we were seeing going forward. So am I tripping for not being panicked about this team going forward? I'm seeing all the things on Twitter and all around the media. Like, I saw Stat Muse tweeted out the fact that, you know, the Bucks had a 60 to 70%.
Here's their win percentage under
Yeah,
Griff.
win percentage with Griff, and it's 20% with Doc, and how the Pistons and the Wizards are the only teams with a lower win percentage than what Doc has right now. And the Celtics are the only team with a higher win percentage than what Griffin had. And you got other accounts putting out somewhat false narratives about the fact that the Bucks have blown a lead in every L that they've had so far. They mentioned that against the Jazz, the Bucks had a 19-point lead. They blew that. Had a 13-point lead against Denver, blew that. Had a 7-point lead against Phoenix. Didn't they hold on to that? That account also did mention the fact that the Bucks had a 15-point lead against Dallas, but they didn't lose that game. So I don't know why they put that one there. It's just propaganda at this point.
Or that Dallas blew a 25-point lead. I mean, blown leads happen. You know, like, I would assume every loss, for the most part, has a blown lead at some point. There are very few wire-to-wire victories.
It's a game of runs. That's what happens. So just, do you think I'm crazy for not being panicked about this team as it currently stands?
No, I mean, panicked. I'm definitely not panicked. I think we're aligned here in that I wouldn't even say worried, but you're just cognizant of, okay, I like what I'm seeing, and not to borrow the phrase, but I do trust the process that we're seeing. The results have not been ideal so far. But the process of how they're getting there is what leaves you optimistic. That I like how this team has looked defensively. The numbers back it up as well. That, you know, the Bucks, it's only 8 games, but the thing that I point to is, number one, it matches the eye test. And secondly, in these 8 games, they have 5 of those 8 games played against teams that are in the top 10 in offensive rating during this stretch that we're looking at. So it's not as though the Bucks are, they did this, like the conversations that we were having in December when, the Bucks are doing this, but they haven't really played anybody. That hasn't been the case during this stretch. They've gone from 21st to 10th defensively in the pre versus post coaching change. Their turnovers, as we mentioned, and Frank mentioned this a couple of days ago too, have gone from 30th to 12th in percentage of opponent possessions that result in a turnover. Rebounding rate, defensive glass, has gone up from 18th to 7th. And those were the big ones as you came in, of, if you can clean this up, and transition. You can clean up transition. You can do a better job rebounding. I think they'll be headed in the right spot. The other really sizable jump is the percentage of plays that opponents run in transition has gone from 30th to 7th in the league against the Bucks. So they've cleaned up their transition. Teams are still scoring, I think, at a higher rate in transition, but they're not getting as many opportunities, which is much, much better. They're rebounding the ball. And again, when you think about some of the issues they had with points in the paint. That number has come down, where it's a couple of games in a row that it's been around 48 or 50. That was popping up because opponents were crashing the glass. They were beating you on the boards. They were getting those second chance points. They were getting points around the rim and in the paint, and that was just leading to more efficient offense. Your offense was putting the defense in a bad spot too with that transition game. They've cleaned that up. So all of these numbers do look better, and people will point to, well, the offense hasn't. And it hasn't, right? The offense has been around 20th in this 8-game stretch. They've played a couple of games against good defenses. It hasn't been the same level as their defense against good offenses. But as we mentioned, again, no Brooke Lopez for 3 of those games, no Brooke Lopez, Dame, or Khris for 1 of those games. And, I know this might be nitpicking, but the road trip especially, we look at the overall number and say, man, the offense wasn't good. And overall, was it? No. But it was basically 1 quarter against the Jazz where they were not good. And again, that was the 4th quarter on night 2 of a back-to-back with an altitude change. It was the 1st quarter in Dallas where they were not good. It was the 4th quarter in Denver where they were not good. It was especially the 4th quarter against Portland. So it's not as though they've had these duds where you've started to see a little bit of a foundation being built here. And that's the encouraging part is I legitimately did not know what to expect prior to the coaching change. You like the record, but I think you still had some uneasiness when you looked at the elite teams in the league. And a lot of that is gone where you feel like, well, what I'm seeing, at least, I feel like we're better positioned against those teams with some of these things the team has implemented and is doing now than they were in the past. The one thing that gives you hesitation is, as we pointed out, you're not even through the toughest part of your schedule yet. You just went through a 5-game road trip against good teams. And I know the Blazers by record are not a good team, but they've been playing much better of late. Now you have 2 back-to-backs. One of them has the Hornets. So you're going to circle that and say, okay, we got to win this game. One of them is against one of the 4 teams tied for the lead in the Western Conference in the Timberwolves. And the second half of the second back-to-back is against another one of those co-leaders in the Nuggets, the Miami Heat, who have been playing somewhat better of late, although the record still doesn't show it, and have always given you problems. And then you go into Memphis against who knows who's going to be available for the Grizzlies. Yeah, going into that All-Star break. So I think you have to circle the Hornets and Grizzlies games and say, look, I don't want to look past our opponent, but we got to get these 2 games. We got to get at least one of the other 3 games among those back-to-backs and have a 3-2 homestand going into it, because as much as we like what we're seeing, you like a lot more of what you're seeing with the Cavs and the Knicks. And we've mentioned this a couple of times. Their schedules are much easier than the Bucks. So even though it's trending in the right direction in terms of the process, you still don't want to be in a spot where you have the most difficult schedule in the league. And now all of a sudden you got a lot of ground to make up. You're already 2 games back of the Cavs in the loss column. And you don't want to have to play catch up with 3 teams in your conference against that schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Cavs have been hot. So have the Knicks. They're 9-1 over their last 10 games. So you have to, keep an eye on what your opponents are doing, but also try to take care of business at home. And after the Suns game, Giannis mentioned the fact, this was one of the toughest road trips of my career. And I think about all that goes into that. Not only was it a good level of competition here for this Bucks team to go against, but again, new coach, you're having longer shoot-arounds, you're playing longer minutes, you're expected to have a different level of defensive intensity on the court as well. And Giannis said, we have to get in better shape as well. So there's also a conditioning aspect to it with this team that they're going to have to continue to grow through that. They're learning on the fly a bit here. And to some, that might sound like excuses for this team, but I'm looking at the process and how things have been lining up, and I feel a lot more confident about how this team has been. Now, the offense, something to keep an eye on. I'm sure nobody was thinking hey, the offense is going to, drop from being 4th down to 20th or whatever it has been now, depending on where you look for this team's offense. But given the firepower that this team has with Giannis, with Dame, with Khris, when Brooke, when they're fully healthy, that's not as big of a concern for me at the moment. I feel like this team still has levels to unlock with their offense, and I have a lot more confidence in them being able to figure that out now that I'm seeing defensively that they have been able to right the ship a bit in some of the areas that they had struggled with earlier on in the season. So And again, this team might look different come this time, well, not this time tomorrow because the deadline will still be going on, but come Thursday, 2 p.m., things might look a little bit different for this team as well. So something to keep an eye on. But at this moment, I wouldn't say I'm concerned about the Bucks. I do think that Portland loss was a bad loss of the 4 that they had on this road trip, but that's the only one from this road trip where I'm like, that's a bad loss. The other ones, I can't get too upset about them and the effort that was put forth in the games, especially with who the Bucks had available. So to some, it might sound like excuses, but to me, it's just keep an eye on what happened. And I'll continue to keep an eye out on what happens with this team, because as they're approaching All-Star break, 5 games to go, 4 of those games are back-to-back situations. It's going to be quite a finish as we get to the All-Star break. So let's wrap up there, Justin. That'll do it for today's episode of Locked On Bucks. As a reminder, come join us tomorrow live when we cover the NBA trade deadline and cover moves that the Bucks might make come tomorrow, as well as what's going on in the rest of the league. So make sure you guys come back for that. And for Justin and myself, we'll catch you guys later.